Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're opening up what feels exactly like a highly classified, redacted intelligence dossier. We're going to peel back the layers on an incredibly complex and frankly fragile new framework that's reportedly been negotiated between the United States and Iran. Just imagine these heavy, textured pages laid out right in front of us, covered in high-stakes geopolitical schematics and detailed blueprints. We're going to decode exactly what's sitting on the table in this totally unprecedented draft agreement.
All right, let's just dive right into the 6 key pieces of this 14-point blueprint. We're looking at the $300 billion paradox, unlocking the Hormuz choke point, the nuclear trade-off, the Lebanon clause, the major discrepancies in the draft, and finally, the reality of this entire unsigned document. Let's get into it. Starting with part 1, the $300 billion paradox, from maximum pressure to maximum investment.
$300 billion. Let that sink in for a second. Sources indicate this draft outlines an absolute behemoth of a reconstruction program. Diplomats are actually calling it an international investment fund. Now, if this gets signed, it could literally pave the way for major U.S. energy and oil corporations to physically enter Iran and invest in joint ventures to rebuild their infrastructure. It is a staggering amount of money, and it's a figure that has left a lot of seasoned geopolitical analysts completely stunned.
Because here's where the paradox really hits you. For years, the established U.S. strategy was maximum pressure, crushing economic sanctions, intense naval blockades, military pressure, all originally designed to force regime collapse. But this new draft, it suddenly pivots to a $300 billion reconstruction program focused on joint ventures, massive economic stabilization, and liquidating assets. So a campaign built to crush an economy might suddenly transform into a massive financial buyout to stabilize it? It's wild. But to understand why, we have to look at the geography. Moving to part 2, unlocking the Hormuz choke point and its strict maritime protocol.
Trace the map down to the Strait of Hormuz. A full fifth of the world's petroleum liquids flows right through this narrow choke point, making it the absolute crown jewel of this deal for the United States. And according to the drafted text, there's a very specific 3-step maritime protocol to untangle it. Step 1. Iran is legally bound to clear out all naval mines within a really tight 30-day window. Step 2. In a direct quid pro quo, the U.S. proportionally rolls back its aggressive naval blockade on Iranian ports. And Step 3. Unrestricted commercial shipping finally resumes. The U.S. locked down some incredibly explicit conditions here. Absolutely no maritime tolls, no forced inspections, and absolutely zero Iranian interference with international vessels. Which brings us to part 3. The nuclear trade-off. Auditing the uranium and the assets.
970 pounds. That is the massive amount of highly enriched uranium sitting dead center in this agreement. And you have to add another 10 tons of lower-grade nuclear material on top of that. Under this framework, Iran formally commits to not pursuing a nuclear weapon. In exchange, the very first item on the agenda during this proposed 60-day negotiation window is figuring out how on earth to safely audit, dispose of, or manage this massive stockpile. It's an enormous logistical and security challenge just sitting right there on the blueprint.
So what's Iran's counterask for that level of nuclear cooperation? Well, they're eyeing their $24 billion in frozen assets, which are currently locked up in foreign banks because of international sanctions. Out of that pie, Iran is demanding immediate access to at least $20 billion. And for an economy that's been battered for years, getting those funds released isn't just some nice negotiating perk, it's a sheer, vital economic lifeline they need to survive.
Part 4. The Lebanon clause, expanding the ceasefire beyond borders. Now, this 60-day ceasefire window isn't just operating in a vacuum between Washington and Tehran. The text explicitly includes a clause aimed at halting the broader regional war, specifically targeting the Israel-Hezbollah conflict in Lebanon. And politically, this is incredibly combustible. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly shown really deep resistance to this in the past. In fact, while these very negotiations were happening behind closed doors, intense military bombings in Lebanon actually escalated. It is a massive, highly ambitious attempt to freeze conflicts far beyond Iran's own borders.
And that leads us to part 5, a blueprint of discrepancies. Literally reading different texts in the same room. This is where things get truly complicated. Both sides are looking at the exact same drafted document, but they are interpreting it completely differently. On the U.S. side, they see a 60-day temporary ceasefire extension. But Iran, they're interpreting it as a full, permanent declaration of the end of the war on all fronts. And look at the naval blockade. The U.S. says it's going to be lifted in phased, proportional stages as those naval mines are cleared. Iran believes the blockade vanishes immediately the second the ink dries. These aren't just minor translation hiccups, folks. These are fundamentally different realities being mapped out by two sides sitting in the exact same room.
Plus, as any seasoned intelligence analyst will tell you, the devil is usually in the omissions. When you trace the lines of this draft, it is deafeningly silent on the actual final fate of that highly enriched uranium stockpile. They're basically just kicking that massive headache down the road to the 60-day window. It also completely ignores Iran's ballistic missile program, and there is zero mention of Iran's continued funding of regional proxy networks. In a deal like this, the parameters of what is left off the page are just as crucial as what's written on it.
Finally, Part 6, the unsigned document, hanging by a thread.
Because here is the ultimate catch. This entire multi-billion-dollar framework, it's currently sitting completely unsigned. Let's look at the key players operating the shadows here. You've got U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance acting as a major architect behind the scenes. You have Qatari and Pakistani mediators doing the heavy lifting for the back-channel diplomacy. But then you have the holdouts. Literally none of this becomes reality without the explicit final sign-off from U.S. President Donald Trump, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, and potentially the IRGC. Vance himself even told reporters it's really hard to say when or if the president will actually sign it.
Which brings us to this incredibly stark reality, perfectly summarized by this quote from our sources. The Middle East remains just one stray missile away from a total inferno. Man, that hits hard. This piece is entirely on probation. The situation on the ground is so fragile that recent Iranian missile strikes targeting Kuwait are already testing the absolute limits of this unfinalized text right as we speak.
So we're left with a monumental question to ponder as we close this dossier. Is this drafted text a genuine, workable 60-day blueprint for lasting peace? Or is it just an impossible $300 billion buyout, fundamentally misunderstood by both sides and completely doomed to fail? It is an unprecedented geopolitical gamble, and the stakes, honestly, couldn't be any higher. Keep questioning, stay curious, and I'll see you next time as we decode the world's most complex blueprints.